Welcome back to another episode of A Consumer's Guide to Property Damage. Today we are with Doug Quinn, who is the Executive Director for the American Policyholders Association. We do have another episode that goes into that a little bit more, so make sure that you tune in for that one as well. But today we're going to actually focus and talk about his experience as a consumer through a catastrophic loss. Doug, thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thank you for having me.
Prior to what happened, and we'll have you go into that a little bit more, did you ever think that you would be somebody that would be affected in a catastrophic loss?
No, I never considered it. I had purchased my house and I researched the property because I come out of insurance, so I'm, very risk focused. And that house had been built 50 years prior and had never flooded once. So I was not concerned in any way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So let's talk about what happened.
So I basically, I just bought a house. I bought a house on the water. It had always been my dream to live on the water, and I had an opportunity to do that, so I bought it, and I did my homework. I did my research just to be on the safe side because I am a 30-year financial advisor. My firm was owned by one of the country's largest insurance companies, so I'm very focused on risk management. So I did my homework, made sure that there wasn't a significant flood risk. Even so, I still bought the maximum legal amount of flood insurance that I could buy. So as the storm started to approach, Superstorm Sandy started coming, I wasn't that concerned because I had done everything I could to be able to, diversify my risk.
And it's really fortunate that you had that background, because I think that most consumers wouldn't think to do maximum flood coverage, and and I've been told, I don't know, but I'm not in a flood area, but that sometimes flood insurance doesn't even exist. It isn't something that comes standard.
No, and it's something that, believe it or not, if you look at the statistics, something like 95% of the counties in the United States have some degree of exposure to a flood zone. A lot of people think it's just, those people on the coasts. Right. But believe it or not, it's the people in the small you have a creek in the backyard we saw after Hurricane Florence in North Carolina, some of these backyard creeks come up 20 feet. Wow. You don't realize it. So that's a common thing. We were just in Kentucky with the floods, and these tiny little creeks that are coming down the hollers, no one thinks anything about it except when it goes over its banks and it wipes out 100 square yards. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people are exposed to flood, but they do not understand it. Things have never flooded before, and we spend a lot of time explaining to people that what used to be is no longer a model for what will happen in the future. Right now, with climate change and sea level rise, whether you believe it's man-made or not, it doesn't really matter once your house is wiped out. Right, all those esoteric conversations just go away. But we're seeing increase in frequency in storms. We're seeing an increase in intensity in storms. And a lot of people who were never impacted before are getting impacted now.
Or will be.
Yes, and it's coming as well. So
now, did Superstorm Sandy, as you referred to it, did that turn into a hurricane, or what? How did that all kind of unfold?
The official designation was a superstorm. It was primarily a flooding event, although there were significant wind issues in other areas, but the flooding was the primary. It just had sort of hit at the same time. The moon was in the right phase. The high tide was at the right phase. The storm surge was pretty dramatic. I watched the water come in very quickly from my house. I really didn't anticipate that it would. I kind of, they were saying the high tide's going to be around 9 o'clock. At the same time the storm is hitting, that'll be the apex. 9 o'clock, I had lost power, because of the wind. The power lines were down, but my whole neighborhood had been evacuated. I stayed.
You were a holdout.
I was that guy because I'm generally confident in my ability to get myself out of any situation that I find myself in. Whether that's hubris or not, we don't know. But in this particular instance, I stayed, I looked out, I can always tell from my dock where the water level is, whether or not, I have something to worry about. I looked out, my dock was where the normal high tide level is, so no big deal. I went in and I took a shower by candlelight, and when I came out, the water was in the street in front of my house. And 5 minutes later, it was at my front step. And 5 minutes later, it was starting to come in through my kitchen. So I had a little bit of time to grab. I had a couple of go bags prepared. I had already parked my car over on high ground, and I had a little bit of time to sort of, throw some things over my shoulder and step out into the water and wade out of my neighborhood.
Wow.
And
How
again,
deep was that? Like, are you,
I didn't think about it because my house was a little bit up. So in my house, it was, maybe ankle deep to start. I had gotten about 4 feet at the peak of the storm. But while I was there, it was about ankle deep. But then when I stepped down into the street in total darkness, it was about thigh deep.
oh, wow.
So I'm sort of walking down my street. Everything's abandoned. Everything's pitch black. And trying to remember, is there a manhole on my street? Because that's my only concern is if there's an open manhole cover that I drop into and I'm not coming out. So I kind of waited out and I had some friends who came over earlier and said, if you have any issues, come to our house. So I sort of had my escape route all planned out and waited around to my car. I hopped in my car. I drove out. The water was up to the bumpers by that point, and drove to a friend's house, and we spent the night there, and I came back the next day.
That was a matter of about 20 minutes, it sounds like.
It was when I first noticed the water in the street in front of my house, it was probably about 15 minutes till it was actually in my kitchen. It was just boom, boom, and you're in denial. I'm like, okay, well, it's in the street. It probably won't come into the yard. Okay, it's in the yard. It probably won't come to my
Into the
stoop.
house.
Yeah, it's in my stoop. It probably won't come in the house. Oh, it's in the house, but maybe it won't come. And that was obviously just denial that was kicking in. I think a lot of people experienced that.
Absolutely.
Well, we're grateful that you are safe and here to talk a little bit about your story. So, what happened in the weeks after? How did you navigate that from filing a claim and what happened?
What I recall, I went to my house the next day, and by that point the water was still pretty high. It had receded quite a bit, but I had to wade into the house, and thinking, okay, this is bad. But that's why I have insurance. And I hear that from disaster victims over and over, even people with single losses. This is bad, but I'll get through it because I did the right thing. I bought insurance. I paid my premiums. I made sure that I did the responsible thing. And that was my first thought. No worries. That's exactly why we buy insurance. And then I went sort of through the process because when you're in a cat zone, nothing happens quickly. Infrastructure, everything is broken down and roads are impassable and there's security because there's issues with looting and so and of course all of the responders, all of the the insurance responders are overwhelmed. So the process of getting an adjuster out there didn't really go very quickly. When they came out there, then they were going to send me a report, and the report took quite some time, and then they wanted an engineer, and the engineer took quite some time, and this was my first experience with a carrier-hired engineer, which is the insurance company said, we're going to send an engineer out. I said, fine. And they came out, and they basically came back to me, and you're talking about months now, right? Months and months and months for this process
And
to
you
go
had
on.
been out of your home during that time. You couldn't live there, obviously.
No, I tried the first couple of days. I pushed some of the muck aside. When you ever go into a flood zone and into a flood impacted home,
terrible.
it's not just the water's wet. There's like an inch of muck.
Mud.
Basically the seafloor in your front yard is in your. So I pushed some muck aside from my fireplace. Because obviously it was early November by now. I built the fire. I tried to camp out on my couch with a battery operated radio and a lantern, and even in November in New Jersey, mold starts to come pretty quickly, and that's something we're constantly warning people about with these structures. Mold is a big problem. So, and of course, there's thousands of people out of their homes. There's limited rental opportunities. My teenage daughter and myself lived out of my car for a month, couch surfing with friends. So I would go pick her up from school. We'd go to the diner. We'd have something to eat, and then we'd talk about whose house do we want to go to. Who, and we had plenty of friends who opened their homes to us.
Thank God.
Yeah, and we were very fortunate about that. So we lived out of our home for about a month, out of our car for about a month until we were able to find a rental place. So now I'm in a rental. Now I'm, trying to get organized. And I had hired my own engineer who, made a very clear report, showing Foundations cracked from hydrostatic pressure, something that is meant to hold a vertical load, getting horizontal pressure from the water, thousands of tons, and we see it where it undermined the foundation. You could see striations in the actual dirt that had washed into the crawl space from the water flow. And so it was pretty obvious. I mean, it was obvious just looking at it. And then when I got the insurance company's report, which is we're denying certain things, like the foundation being one, we'll pay some. They paid me, I think they offered me 37 cents on the dollar.
Oh.
So my house turned out to be a total loss. With 4 feet of water, you're not going to restore a house.
No.
Right. So, but they said, we'll pay this and we'll pay that, but we're not paying for your foundation. And I said, fine, send me the engineer report. I'd like to see that because my engineer says something very different, and he's got pictures and diagrams that seem, consistent with the loss. And they tried to tell me that no, we will not send you the engineer report. It's proprietary information.
And is that true? Is it proprietary information? Can a homeowner request an engineer report from their insurance company if they were to send an engineer out? And just for our viewers, we do have an episode,
A segment on it.
that is completely designated towards engineers and what to know about that. This is just really to answer the question at this moment.
Sure. So to answer your question, they should not only request, they should demand. If you're going to deny rebuilding my family's most valuable asset on the basis of a document, you can bet your ass you're going to show me that
Absolutely.
document.
Yeah.
And that request, would you suggest that be made in writing? Should absolutely be made in writing, correct?
Yes, we recommend that as soon as your insurance company says we're sending an engineer out to the property, and I'm sure you'll cover this in your future, but there are certain things you do, and you do it in writing. You CC the engineering firm they've assigned, and you CC the insurance company, and you say, number one, I want to know the scope of which that engineer is being sent to my property. What is he meant to do or she meant to do? I want to see a copy of their CV. I want to see that they're qualified, because sometimes we'll see marine engineers.
What is a
inspecting the
CV?
home. It's a fancy word for a resume.
Okay.
What are their qualifications? Like
What
you said,
type
it could
of
be
engineer are they?
exactly what
Yeah.
type of engineer. It
Right.
could be they could send a nuclear engineer to assess your water.
Right.
What type
right.
of engineer should they be looking for? A structural engineer? Is that what?
Somebody who has structural. First of all, you generally want to see the words PE afterwards, because that means that they have further experience and further requirements for ethics, et cetera, and education. And then you want to see somebody who has structural experience
Got
as
it.
well. And
Okay.
even that doesn't make them the end all be all, nor does that give them the right to cheat your family out of their home.
That's right.
But we want to see a copy of their CV. I want to know the scope of work that you're asking them to do. And you will need an appointment to come to my home. We will do none of this. I was in the neighborhood. I just showed up. So you will make an appointment to come to my property. You will show me ID when you get to the property. My contractor or my public adjuster or my attorney or all three will be present, and your entire inspection will be videotaped.
So you send all of that. That's your recommendation of what a homeowner should do in the event that their insurance company says we're going to bring an engineer out to assess your property.
Yes, and
Okay.
let's not kid ourselves. When the insurance company is sending an engineer to your home, you are in dispute.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The insurance company is not investing several $1,000s into an engineer to figure out how to get you more money on your claim. It is exactly the opposite. It is a technique to be able to minimize or deny that claim. So as soon as they say we're sending an engineer, we're sending a building consultant, we're sending, this person or that person to do an extra inspection, you are officially in dispute, and you should now treat it as though you're in dispute and start covering yourself appropriately.
That
Right.
makes sense.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's go back to the story. So
I knew none of that at the time.
and that's exactly why we're doing this,
Yes.
right? We are hoping to provide consumers with as much education as possible. So if they were ever in that position, hopefully not, but some of our viewers will be. I think that is inevitable. At least they have the knowledge now going into it. Unfortunately, from your lesson.
Basically, to be able to advocate for themselves. I mean, as you said, you're a very intelligent man and you didn't know these things. No matter what all of us do outside of this, we don't know what we don't know until we're in this situation, which is why we're hoping that this gives somebody else the ability that maybe you didn't have at the time to understand.
Well, even as a restoration professional, I don't know that I would have thought to do all of those detailed things, right? And so I think that we're just providing people with resources and education so that they have the ability to navigate these things as they arise or if they arise. So,
Sure. Because until such a time as you have a problem with your insurance company, generally when you file a claim, you are believing that you're in good hands. You're believing you have a good neighbor. All of these TV commercials, you can't watch a show without seeing 5 insurance company TV commercials. I can't watch a YouTube video without seeing all these commercials constantly gaslighting me about what a great job they're doing. And that, yeah, you're in good hands. And yes, you have a good neighbor as long as you're sending them checks. But when the system is reversed and they're now, you expect the process to go the other way and you want them to send you a check, it's a completely different story. And what people need to understand is your interests and the interest of the insurance company at the time of claim are adverse. They're not aligned. Who's aligned with me as a consumer? My restoration professional, my attorney, my public adjuster. These are people whose interests are aligned with me as a consumer. My insurance is adverse, and it is a zero-sum solution. If they pay me $1, they lose $1. And they understand that very clearly, but the general public does not understand that. That is why they spend billions and billions of dollars to advertise and tell you everything's good, don't worry about it. But what I will tell people is when you get into that situation, you have to understand you're negotiating with somebody that they are trying not to pay you as much as you think you're entitled to or how much you should be entitled to.
And,
you have to
and
treat
there
it
are
that way.
consumers that take advantage of it too, right? We've got bad players on every
100%.
side. And, you know, it has to be reasonable. And what we're really trying to make sure is we're teaching people how to be reasonable, what to expect. Yes, I agree with you that it does become adversarial, so to speak. It doesn't have to be terrible, and it's not always terrible, but
Correct.
knowing in advance that, you know, that there are certain ways that you can help set yourself up to try to reduce any opportunities for those types of things to exist, like fraud or unnecessary claims, whether it's from your contractor of choice or it comes from the insurance company. It's just, we want to make sure people understand what they're getting into and how to best protect themselves on all avenues. So let's go back to them denying you the engineering report. What did you then do next?
I had a 4-step plan because, again, I'm a financial professional and I had worked in the insurance industry my whole adult life. I'm from an area of the country that we tend to argue and fight a lot in the Northeast. That's just the culture. And I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I was built for this fight, and it still almost broke me. So I can't imagine what other people go through. So I get an engineer report that says that these giant cracks in your foundation and the big hole where the water undermined your foundation and rushed into my crawl space were pre-existing and earth movement. The language they use is shifting of the supporting soils. And in flood insurance, very conveniently, earth movement is an exclusion. That means they don't have to pay for it. So I had just bought my house, I think like 16 months before. So I knew those giant cracks in my foundation did not exist.
Now, did you have documented pictures of that?
I did.
You did? Awesome.
I had an inspection report and
Great.
from buying the house, I had all that. I had pictures from advance showing none of that. So I sort of had a 4-step process. Number one, I'm going to turn it over to the insurance company and give them, an honest opportunity to do the right thing. And I never in a million years believed that they wouldn't.
Absolutely.
Because I had drank the Kool-Aid. I had believed that, I was, everything was fine. So I'm going to turn it over. And then if that doesn't work, then, I will talk to hiring a public adjuster. I'm sorry, the first step I went before that is I would appeal to the FEMA mitigation department. FEMA runs a national flood insurance program. So I sort of thought my government would have my back. I'm going to appeal to them. This is very obvious. Here's the pictures from before the storm where none of that damage is there, and here's the pictures from after the storm where it is there. It's a monkey could see.
Cut and dry.
Yeah.
So FEMA will take care of it. And if then that didn't work, then I'll start talking about professional representation, which is a public adjuster, and worst case scenario is litigating with an attorney, which I believe very heavily in. All of those things I did not believe prior to that. I just kind of thought, yeah, I'm just going to turn it over and we'll give them a chance to do
They're
the right
going to
thing.
do the right thing.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, to your point, people steal from insurance companies all the time. Somebody who wouldn't return a library book late has no problem letting the mechanic do a little extra work on the car because the insurance company is covering the bill, and that's wrong. Right?
I agree. Yeah.
That costs all of us. And that's real. And do I think that insurance companies cheat people 100% of the time? No, I don't.
No.
But you're talking about such a large scale.
I agree. It's a different situation than
Right.
probably what some people would experience on a daily or more common basis.
Correct. Such a large scale that even if it's 5% or 10%, you're talking about, many
Millions.
people. And because it's people's most valuable asset, their home, the impact of that is dramatic. We don't want the insurance company to pay $1 more than what they owe.
Absolutely.
And we don't want them to pay $1 less to consumers.
Right.
We want it to be ethical and honest, and we want to have, healthy, resilient insurance markets are important for all of us. So what we can all do to make sure that happens is very important.
I agree. Thank you for saying that. So you went to FEMA, and that obviously did not work based on the tone I'm gathering.
No, we found out that FEMA ruled in favor of the insurance companies on people who appealed 93% of the time.
So the deck was stacked against you from the
Yes.
from the in the onset of submitting that back to them and saying, here's proof.
Yeah, we sort of thought, there's this FEMA mitigation department in Washington, and I'm going to send them the file, and they're going to look into it and investigate it. What we found out later in litigation was they just took the complaint and they handed it to the insurance company I was complaining against and said, hey, answer this. And when we looked at some of the emails that came out in discovery, it was obvious there was collusion there. It was obvious that there was not... the lifeguards were sort of, friends with the sharks. It's like emails saying, hey, Bob, did you look at that Quinn file? Hey, Dave, how was your weekend? I'll get it to you later. So the people I'm complaining against are answering the complaint against them. And we found that's what they did. They just passed that file directly to the insurance carriers, and the carriers answered obviously in their own favor, and FEMA rubber stamped it. So that was why they only sided with consumers about 7% of the time.
You mentioned that you had gone to litigation. So obviously you had said
That's where this ended up.
Right. You had a 4-step process. So let's talk about the litigation and what that process was like, and how long did this take, and
how did you know that's where you needed to go next? I mean, how did you know that was still an option?
I had sort of laid out a battle plan. I'm going to do scaled. I'm going to do this, and this. If this doesn't work, right, to be reasonable about it. I didn't want to start off with the nuclear option. And look, I was raised by old school Depression era parents. We work for our money. We don't sue. I never sued anyone. I was probably 50 years old when this happened. I was told, I'd never sued anyone in my entire life. Never even thought about suing anyone, and I was forced to go hire an attorney, and I was actually ashamed. And you shouldn't be. There's no stigma. I had just been raised with those kind of values. But of course, now I look at it exactly the opposite. If you're not getting justice, you absolutely go hire a public adjuster or an attorney. You absolutely get professional representation, because you can bet the insurance company has armies of attorneys.
Absolutely.
Armies. And hundreds of millions of dollars to back them up, and lobbyists, and the deck is very much stacked. So I went through litigation. We filed. The insurance company denied it right off the bat. They put in a motion for dismissal on the grounds that it wasn't even it was a frivolous lawsuit. There was no grounds to it, and that's what we saw with Superstorm Sandy across the board. Because at this point, this didn't happen in a week.
it wasn't just you suing, right?
This was the course over a year, and at this point I'm talking to neighbors, I'm going to meetings, I'm getting politically involved. I'm starting to hear these same stories
As you
from
still
everybody.
haven't been allowed to move back to your home.
Not even close. Not even close. And so I'm starting to hear these stories from all of the people in the community and from my family members, from people in other states, and they're all saying the same thing. The insurance company hired an engineer. The engineer came out, sent a report saying it was pre-existing or a long-term differential movement of the supporting soil, and denied on that basis. I'm sort of seeing, we're starting to put a pattern together. And
Was
we're-
it the same engineer?
No, believe it or not, there was multiple firms that they were hiring, but our guts are telling us something's
Something's
here.
still wrong.
There's
Got it.
something wrong here, and the insurance industry and FEMA is saying, nope, nothing's wrong, everything's good, and the average person, again, is not suited to standing up to a billion-dollar insurance company. They're not suited to standing up to an agency of your government. So when an insurance company and an agency of your government and an engineer and an adjuster are all telling you this is all you're entitled to, 37 cents on the dollar, the average person is going to capitulate. And you have to understand that even smart people capitulate, because at this point, you're not your everyday person. You've been through a natural disaster.
You're exhausted
there's
and
a lot of
overwhelmed.
trauma.
Yes.
And yeah, you
The
just
trauma.
you probably just want it to be done, right?
There's a big issue with disaster trauma. There's a big issue with people going through depression and anxiety and increased, drug abuse and alcohol abuse.
It's its
can
own
imagine.
form of post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yes.
It really is, and it's they've very clearly documented that.
Yes, and even the children are going through it. So now your family's in crisis, and you're displaced. You've lost all your paperwork. You're in the worst position to be able to have this fight, and no one's ever had the fight before, right? So that's where the problem comes in. So obviously having a professional who does this every single day is a very good idea. The quicker you engage them, the sooner you engage them, the better. And that's just my personal experience. And if you asked me that the day before the storm, I would have told you something very different.
Now, since I've known you, I believe you moved back into your home, which was maybe last year. Was it last year?
2019, exactly, almost just short of 7 years from when
From
I
the
lost
time
my
that
home.
you
Yeah.
lost your home.
Yeah.
7 years.
So we sort of went through this process where we're fighting them, and they tried to shoot down, all of the lawsuits, and 2,000 of us had sued. And that's statistically about 2% of people will litigate after a disaster. Most of the people will just throw their hands up and,
Wow.
take it.
That's such a large number too. 2,000 people sued,
But that's
and the
only
other
2%.
98% didn't. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
What ultimately ended up being the outcome of that trial? Did you go to trial?
No, believe it or not, the case cracked about 3 years into it because, again, they deny. Nope, this is all you're entitled to. They told everyone that. They fought them to courts. And because we had, it was sort of a team effort, right? There was a few of us that worked with grassroots groups. There were a few of us that were attorneys, a few of us that were public adjusters, a few of us were working with our senators' offices were excellent. We had, the benefit of having really good senators, Senator Menendez in Jersey and Senator Booker, and then of course the New York senators were very helpful as well. But we sort of put the pressure on from all directions, and then it cracked because we were able to find a case where the engineers, what turned out was there was one case that was in litigation, and this came down to just one case where we found it, and it broke the whole thing open. And the engineer had come out and said, yep, this house is destroyed. It was a house in Long Beach, New York. I've seen pictures of it. There were 4 feet of sand pushed up against the house. It was a total loss, and the engineer said, yep, this will probably be a total loss. He sent it into his firm. His firm sent it to the insurance company, and the people got the report from the insurance company saying,
Nothing wrong.
long-term differential movement of supporting soils not covered.
So was the insurance company changing the reports? Is that what happened? Or
What we
how did
found was, and it was just by a freak, was that those people ran into that engineer again and said, what happened? You cheated us. You said this was, and he said, that's not my, they showed him the report, and he said, that's not my report. And he had a thumb drive with all of his reports. He fired up his laptop and put them side by side. And what happened is he had sent it into his firm. The firm, in engineering, there's a process called peer review, and it's a perfectly legitimate process where other professionals will sit around and review the report, review the pictures. They may make changes, but that original engineer has to stamp it, seal it, and sign off on it. And that's very important with engineering. Their seal is a very
Especially if
important
they're
thing.
professionally licensed.
Yes. So they were putting changes to the reports and not getting the original engineer to seal it if they were, or pressuring others to do it. So we had one engineer who said I had about 95% of my reports had been changed in peer review without my knowledge. Sometimes it was simple as just adding the word not. The original report said house was damaged by storm forces, and they put the word not, house was not damaged by storm forces. So, and that particular case had been in litigation. And they had concealed that in discovery. They did not turn it over in discovery. So that came out, and the judge, Judge Brown in New York, said, I want to see the original report in every case that's in my court. And Craig Fugate, the head of FEMA, called him and tried to get him to rescind that order. The head of FEMA tried to get him to suppress bringing that evidence of consumers getting cheated to light. And the New Jersey and New York senators pretty much kicked his door in and said that's not happening and gave him hell, and it all came out. And from that, it was, they went out, the New York Attorney General raided an engineering firm on Long Island. They seized some of their files. They went back 2 weeks later, and they walked one of their managers out in handcuffs, and that was all over the paper, and that cracked the whole case. Because now it was obvious that we've been saying for 3 years now, something's wrong here, something's wrong. And they're like, nope, nothing's wrong, nothing going on here.
Look over here.
And then, exactly. So all warfare is based on deception. So that cracked the case. This guy in handcuffs was on the front page of all the local papers.
I remember that.
All the New York papers. And then basically they were ordered to settle all of the litigation. They were ordered to, and bear in mind, 2,000 of us had sued. The insurance carriers laughed at us, did nothing. And I'll tell you about that process. It cost me $40,000 to sue my insurance company to honor the commitment they made when they accepted my premiums. That's $40,000 that did not go into repairing my home. That money's gone. What we also found out later is, well, the insurance company has a pretty significant legal bill to defend themselves. We paid for that, and the National Flood Insurance Program pays the insurance company's attorneys to defend them when they are sued. So now
So they were essentially paid twice.
I'm paying my insurance, my attorney, and I'm paying their attorney. And the attorneys on the other side, we had one attorney brag that he was going to make over $100 million on Sandy, that to the defense of Sandy, one of the major carriers, a gentleman by the name of Gerald Nielsen, from a firm called Nielsen Trees and Carter in Louisiana, said that the defense bill for Superstorm Sandy could reach over $100 million.
And did he say that publicly?
He did say that publicly.
Oh, wow.
Bragged about it.
Wow.
That's unfortunate.
And here's what happens is when you dispute, so the engineers who are cheating you and the adjusters who are cheating you and the attorneys who are cheating you just make more money, because now it goes to court and now they get expert witness fees and they get more billing time involved. So it's actually more profitable for them. So we have this process where I'm paying my attorneys, I'm also paying their attorneys out of our premiums. That's one of the reasons why the National Flood Insurance Program is deep in debt. Fraud, waste, and mismanagement, and some of these situations. And of course, they fought every tooth and nail. There was one case in Sandy where it was a $25,000 claim. They should have just paid it. Silly. The people had to sue for $25,000.
Right.
Yeah.
The opposing law firm, the insurance company's defense counsel, ran up $85,000 in legal bills just getting to pretrial motions, not even going to trial. And that's just on one side. $85,000.
Wow.
So greedy, pigs at the trough, sucking money out of the system. And it is the consumers, the victims, who are the people that pay the premiums, that fund this whole
Loyally.
thing, are getting dragged through the mud and getting their lives ruined over this.
So I do have a question. You mentioned the cost of this litigation and so forth. If a consumer finds themselves in this situation, should they expect that should it unfortunately make it to that point, they have to be concerned about the cost out of pocket for that litigation? Is there any help for them? Is there any way that the average person who, look, let's be honest, for instance, right now, we have somewhat of a recession, right? It depends upon who you talk to. But money can be a little tight for a lot of people. If these people are faced with a situation where they can maybe barely afford to pay their deductible, what do they do, Doug?
Well, there are some states where there's something called fee shifting, where if you litigate against the carrier and you're found to be in the right and they actually did take advantage of you, they'll cover your attorney's fees.
And that's state by state.
And it's state by state. There's not enough of those states. There are other states that there's actually penalties, treble damages, if they're found to unreasonably delay or deny your claim. But there's not enough of those. But what I will say is, you could have conversations with attorneys. A lot of them will tell you, well, yeah, it cost, X amount of dollars, but I got you back 2X by fighting the insurance company. And I'm not in a position to give anybody legal advice.
Sure.
But I'll tell
None
you
of us are attorneys here.
my personal experience and my personal position is we fight to the death. If I paid you premiums, you've accepted an obligation when I suffer a loss to be able to cover that loss, which is the whole point of insurance. It is a collective social program that we all contribute to a pot in the middle. And when one of us suffers a loss that would normally be catastrophic, insurance is very important for the average American, we pull out of the pot, right? But where that becomes a problem is when now there's a profit motive and there's companies and there's stockholders to answer to and they expect profits. Now you have a conflict of interest. That's why the insurance industry's interests and yours are adverse.
Yeah, I always tell people, I don't hate insurance companies because I do understand that they're a business, but I wish the system had been set up differently.
Yes.
I wish from the beginning that they were true nonprofits where, it was money that went into a pot. And I remember, when I first became, I've been a USA member for, 25, 26 years. But we used to get dividend checks, right? And whatever money was put in that didn't get, attributed to claims went back to everybody evenly based on how much coverage they had or how many policies they had. And somewhere along the lines, things shifted. And, it's just a broken system. And hopefully someday we can figure that out. But at least now we can provide some education and some context for consumers to, hopefully prepare themselves in the event that they did experience a catastrophic loss or any loss for that matter. If you're hit by hail or if you're hit by wind, what should you do? What can you expect? And I thank you for sharing your story with us today, because I think that people need to understand what it's like.
There's nothing wrong with capitalism. There's nothing wrong with a business making a profit. It is when you start to bleed into unethical behavior or criminal fraudulent behavior at the expense of your consumers, that's where it becomes a problem.
I 100% agree with that.
And I think that goes to both sides.
I think
it very much goes to both sides, whether
it's
you're
a restoration
or absolutely.
Or insurance. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, it's all wrong. And the one thing we tell people is, rule one is our ethics come first. We're in the best position to hold the insurance industry accountable when we know that we are beyond reproach in our ethical practices. So that's the first thing is, don't try to cheat in the insurance company. Get what you're entitled to, fight to the death for what you're entitled to.
Pay your deductible.
But do not try to cheat the insurance company. It's just, you won't be as successful in a dispute, and you have a very good chance of getting caught. The whole world is geared toward defending insurance companies if you try to cheat them.
Absolutely.
There are many mechanisms in place to catch you, and it's not worth it.
And
It is not
just
worth
not
it.
worth it.
And it's not worth setting
agree.
the example. I mean, your kids are watching you, your family is watching you, your community is watching you. What do you really need to steal? Whether or not we think the insurance company is doing an ethical job or not, that doesn't absolve us of the responsibility to conduct ourselves in an honest manner.
I agree with that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Doug. We appreciate it very much. And we'll see you guys next time.